This is GovExec Daily, where we bring you the federal stories that really matter. It's March 17th, 2021. I'm Ross John Fortuné. After months of negotiations and deliberations, Congress passed and President Joe Biden signed the massive $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan into law last week. While the bill passed with no Republican votes in either the House or Senate, polling does show that a majority of Republican voters support the bill. The plan is massive, with money going out to businesses and local governments. And on Monday, Joe Biden noted how much oversight will be needed in its implementation.
It's one thing to pass a historic piece of legislation like the American Rescue Plan, and it's quite another to implement it. And the devil is in the details. It requires fastidious oversight to make sure the relief arrives quickly, equitably, and efficiently with no waste or fraud.
Federal employees will be tasked with implementing the bill's provisions while still working remotely and dealing with the other stresses of the pandemic that we all are dealing with. The vaccination rollout is moving along in the states, with some health officials distributing the Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson shots better than others. Joining me after a short break will be Courtney Buble. She and I will talk about the state of COVID-19 relief, the implementation of the American Rescue Plan, and other coronavirus stories. Since the COVID-19 pandemic, state and local leaders have faced their greatest challenges to protect the health of residents while dealing with economic turmoil. What lies ahead for states, cities, and counties in a post-pandemic world? During the 1 year into the COVID crisis town hall, viewers will explore how state and local governments plan to move forward in a way that makes them more resilient and equitable. Visit route50.com/events for more information. That's ROUTEFIFTY.com/events. Last week, President Joe Biden signed the massive $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan into law. The bill marks the first major legislative action of Biden's term and backs up his campaign's emphasis on the pandemic over all else. The optimism of vaccines in the relief bill is tempered by the 7-day average of more than 1,300 daily deaths from the pandemic. COVID-19 is still with us, and the government response is adjusting as such. Courtney Buble writes the coronavirus roundup here at govexec.com, and she joins me now to talk about the relief bill, vaccine progress, and other news around COVID-19. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
The relief bill finally passed. It took a while, but what does it have in it to combat the pandemic directly, and what did it have to deal with the economic side of the whole crisis?
So this $1.9 trillion relief package has so many provisions. I'll just run through a few of them. For the pandemic specifically, it has funding for vaccine distribution and education campaigns to boost confidence in taking the vaccine, coronavirus testing, PPE for frontline workers, funding for community health centers that serve communities of color and who have been hit particularly hard by the pandemic. And it also has funding to reopen schools safely so kids can get back to their normal routines. And on the more economic side, there are obviously the relief payments, which many people are very excited about, emergency rental assistance, small business relief, and expansion of child tax credits, and much, much more. Now, for our audience specifically, some things that might be of specific interest are the paid sick leave for federal employees. It's up to 15 weeks or 600 hours. If they have coronavirus or have been exposed to it. It also codifies a provision for federal employees who work on the front lines. If they contract the virus during their official duties, they are eligible for workers' compensation claims. And for federal contractors, this package extends the flexibilities enacted in the CARES Act almost a year ago for contractors who can't access their work sites if they can't telework or it's classified. So it's ordered to keep them in a quote ready state. And that ends and that goes until September 30th, the end of the fiscal year.
This week, President Biden spoke about the plan, and he talked about oversight, sort of referenced his experience during the Obama administration with oversight of the relief plans. Then, and he also introduced a new czar of implementation. What does this gentleman do, and what is the oversight going to entail?
Sure. So I'll first start by saying Gene Sperling is the implementation czar. He is a two-time head of the National Economic Council, and he served in other, various positions in the government. So he will oversee the implementation, which is similar to what President Biden did when he was vice president in 2009, overseeing the Recovery Act. And during his address on Monday, Biden really stressed the importance of oversight. As you know, this is a historic amount of money the government has been spending over the past year, and he really provided a stark contrast to what we saw under President Trump. And while he didn't say Trump administration or President Trump specifically, he referenced that Trump didn't want oversight necessarily when they enacted the CARES Act last March. He issued a signing statement objecting to some of the specific oversight provisions. And then he removed the inspector general who was performing the duties of Pentagon inspector general at the time, who was going to be overseeing the pandemic oversight committee. So by removing him as acting Pentagon IG, he couldn't serve in this position. All this to say that Biden is saying, yes, I want oversight, I want compliance, and I want accountability, because it's so much money, and we really needed to go where it needs to go in order to get out of this pandemic and recession and just resume life again.
Yeah, I mean, we had a show. God, it's got to be a couple of weeks ago now, about some of the changes in the Triple P implementation and how much fraud that law enforcement through the SBA and the Justice Department found there. I mean, there's understandable reasons to get the money out as quickly as possible and get the relief to businesses or municipalities or individuals, but you don't want it to go to the wrong places. I think that's everyone can agree on that. Waste, fraud, and abuse is bad. Let's sort of change gears a little, talk about vaccine progress. As avid listeners of this show know, I am halfway to my vaccine goal, I guess. I had one shot. What does the country look like? What is the percentage of Americans? What is the executive branch doing regarding the vaccine?
So during his first primetime address last Thursday, President Biden directed all states, tribes, and territories to make all adults eligible for vaccines by May 1st. So this is regardless of pre-existing conditions, ages, locations, etc. And earlier this month, he had announced that the country will have enough doses for all adults by the end of May, and that's ahead of schedule. We know what they initially said. So as of Tuesday afternoon, recording this podcast, 21.7% of the U.S. population has received at least one dose, and 11.8% are fully vaccinated. This is according to the CDC data. Now, it should be noted that two of the vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna's, they require 2 doses. However, Johnson & Johnson only requires 1.
Talking about vaccines, part of that is the health agencies. We're a year into the pandemic, but where are we on health agency leadership? CDC Chief Rochelle Walensky has been out there a lot. She's done a fair amount of press. But what are we looking at regarding Health and Human Services, CDC's sort of parent agency, and I guess more importantly, FDA?
So we still don't have a nominee for the FDA yet. And this is despite many calls for many different groups to appoint one, specifically former FDA commissioners who have served under various administrations. They've been strongly encouraging the president to nominate someone. As for FDA, about 2 weeks ago, the Senate Finance Committee held a vote on Xavier Becerra, but they were split. They're tied along party lines. So the Senate has to do an extra procedural process in order to move forward in his confirmation. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer had to file a discharge petition to get his nomination out of committee without having a report from the committee in order to bring to the Senate floor, which the Senate approved last week. Now we're waiting on the final vote. And as you said, the new CDC director has been very vocal and, out there in talking about the pandemic. She's been at all of the COVID briefings by the administration, and that's very different to what we saw with Dr. Robert Redfield under Trump.
Yeah, certainly the communication strategy on these fronts are different. Speaking of confirmed people and the confirmation process, we do have a confirmed HUD secretary as well as a confirmed Interior Secretary in Marcia Fudge and Deb Haaland. What have they said about the pandemic and their agency's roles in fighting the pandemic?
So, a few days after getting sworn in, Fudge told staff in a video message that, in regards to the pandemic and its resulting housing crisis, quote, "The work ahead of us will test us, but I know we're up to the task." And she said that agency employees, though, they can't forget about the other things that they do. Obviously, the pandemic is very consuming, but they do a lot of other important work that has to get done. And she said that she will always prioritize the health and safety of employees and contractors, and that HUD's response to the COVID pandemic, both internally and externally, will continue to be driven by data and science, and we will continue to require the correct and consistent wearing of masks, physical distancing within all HUD buildings. And she also stressed the importance of communication on that as well. And for Deb Haaland, she was recently confirmed she is the first Native American to lead a cabinet agency, and this is pretty significant, not only for the the historical context, but also Native Americans and they have been particularly hard by the pandemic. So now that she's at the agency, she's going to make this, a forefront of her priorities and make sure that they're not lost in the guidance, the testing, the vaccine.
Yeah, it's sort of interesting to see anecdotally the people that I know in Indian country and how different things are. So we'll end on this. So as we started, the relief bill passed. It was signed into law. Checks are going out. All these things are happening. Implementation is going to be overseen by Gene Sperling. But what is Congress doing otherwise? I mean, are they just wiping their hands and saying, all right, we're done? Or what do you think Congress's role is going forward? And what have members of Congress sort of brought up going forward?
I think their work is certainly not done. I think oversight is going to be a main focus now, making sure the money is going where it needs to go, along with GAO, IGs, and other watchdog groups. They'll be continuing to hold hearings on various aspects of the government's response to the pandemic and how to prepare for future ones. And also, as the Senate is taking up Biden's nominees, they're just continuously asking about how officials nominated for all positions are going to handle the pandemic in their respective agencies and the recession, because it's not just the health agencies that are working on this, it's everybody. And then we'll just have to see what other legislation comes up to address gaps that have been highlighted over the past year. Also, I've been waiting to see if Congress will use the Congressional Review Act to undo any of Trump's regulatory actions that could have been impacted at all, by the pandemic or before the pandemic or the recession. We've yet to see that, and that window is slowly, or more like quickly, closing. So I'm interested to see if anything happens on that front. So there are a lot of things. There's probably more that I didn't mention, but there's a lot of work ahead.
Congress's plate is ever full. And, hopefully they can be some semblance of proactive going forward, because this pandemic, as I mentioned up top, it's not over. Even for those of us who are on the road to full vaccination, we make a smaller percentage. We're going to get back to normal. I think that's the main thing that Biden has talked about a lot. And it's sort of, it'll happen piecemeal, and so much is dependent on where you live or whatever. But in the meantime, we will obviously keep an eye on it. And Courtney, you will certainly be here with us to talk about it. And as such, thanks for being on the show today.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to GovExec Daily. Our show was produced by Adam Butler and hosted by me, Ross John Fortuna. We want to thank Courtney Bublé for joining the program. Our music is the song Signals by Catfish Dancing. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or Overcast or wherever you get your podcasts. You can email us any feedback at podcast@govexec.com or hit us up on Twitter @govexec. We'd love to hear from you. We'll talk to you later.